Hello and welcome to another exciting installment of the Green Thumb Lecture Series. I am John Schaefer from the Harris County Public Library, and today we have a special treat for all of the gardening enthusiasts out there. We are thrilled to be joined by a distinguished member of the Harris County Master Gardeners Association who will share with us her expertise on heirloom and pass-along plants today. Now, these plants are rich in history, passed down through generations and carrying with them the stories of resilience, culture, and beauty. Of course, our lecture series takes place online here the third Tuesday of every month at 11 a.m. So mark your calendars for future presentations. And before we dive into the presentation today, I'd like to cover a couple of quick housekeeping items. Number one, we love questions. We have master gardeners who are monitoring the chat and the comment section right now. So please, if you have a question anywhere throughout the presentation, type that into the comment section and we will get you an answer. And we will try and have our presenter answer that at maybe the midway point or at the end of the presentation. But we will definitely get you an answer to your question. Also, mark your calendars because our next show and our last show of 2024 will be on October 15th, and that is featuring the topic Gardening for Extreme Weather. I can't think of a more important topic leading out of the summer and hurricane season and into our winter than gardening for extreme weather. That will be on October 15th, so mark your calendars. And now, without further ado, let's turn our attention to today's exciting topic, heirloom and pass-along plants. It's my pleasure to introduce our presenter, Miss Valerie Depew. Let's see if I can get her up here and tell you a little bit about her. She has been gardening for decades and considers her father to be her most influential gardening mentor. A midlife career change took her to the University of Texas Health Science Center, where she earned a master's degree in biomedical communications before entering the pharmaceutical field. One day I'm going to ask her what that means. After retiring from a 25-year career in the industry, she's been an active volunteer of the Harris County Master Gardeners. She appreciates the engagement and continuous learning that goes with being a master gardener. Her personal garden is a blend of livestock water troughs for vegetable and herbs, pollinator and native flower beds, and a sprinkling of old Southern heirlooms, which I believe we are going to talk about today. How are you doing, Valerie?
Hey, good morning, John. Yes, we are indeed going to talk about those. So it's great to be here. And, we just love this working relationship that we have with the library system to bring education to the public about all kinds of gardening. So,
well, the pleasure is all ours. And we talked a little bit earlier, and I didn't think I knew really what heirloom plants were. But then as I was telling you, I actually have some ivy that has been from my grandmother to my mom, and that it's now passed down to me. And I've never even thought a thing about it other than like, hey, I need a plant here in the house, and I'll just pull some of this. But turns out it's probably close to like 75 years old, and still are one piece of it, or a descendant of it. I'm sure you'll explain how all that works. Is still alive and in the master bedroom. So
yeah, I mean, it's more or less a clone. It is that plant. It's just a newer iteration of that plant. It gets
exactly.
Very complex, and we're not going to get too complex about these things. We want to tell the stories though.
Well, I look forward to it, and tell you what, why don't we go ahead and get started, and I'll let you take over, and we'll jump in the middle somewhere, and we'll take some questions. And if you're listening, please keep those questions coming in the comment section.
Yeah, well, thank you, John. I sure appreciate it, and also appreciate all the master gardeners that are working behind the scenes to put resource links in the comment for you. So we will get going. I'm going to pass the Green Thumb calendar because John mentioned that there is one more around the corner next month, and a very appropriate topic. But so what are we talking about today? We're going to talk about gardeners that love to share plants. And typically the type of plants that we share are heirloom plants, or many known as pass-along plants. The way we'll do this is we'll kind of talk about what makes an heirloom plant, few examples, and then what makes a pass-along plant, a little more history, and then we're going to talk about how they are passed along. We'll talk about plants that are shared by seed, plants that are shared by cutting, plants that are shared by division. Please understand that when we talk about the specific plants, it is by no means a comprehensive list, because the list is vast. Millions, literally, around the world are considered heirloom and pass-along plants. And if you did a Venn diagram of heirloom and pass-along plants, I would say not all heirlooms are pass-along and not all pass-alongs are heirloom, but the Venn diagram would be very large in the middle. So we will get started with that. And why are we talking about this? It's because gardeners love to share. We love to share what we know or what we think we know, because we're all learning every single day. But we love to share plants. There's a lot of energy, time, emotion that goes into growing plants. And one of the great things about being a gardener and knowing other gardeners is that ability to make a connection with them through sharing something that you've worked very hard to grow. So an heirloom plant essentially is a variety that's been grown and passed down through multiple generations, often within a family or within a community. A community can be a very broad term in this case. They're very often open pollinated, and sometimes they're just not available at commercial nurseries. Because in the industry, there's a lot of focus on improved hybrids. Those are a great thing. And patented plants. And again, there's just the industry itself is constantly improving as well to bring new plants to the market. But that's why you may not find a lot of these heirlooms available there. And why are they significant? They often have historic significance or cultural merit that is almost immeasurable in many ways. They've often been cultivated for at least 50 years, sometimes much, much longer. And the great thing about heirloom plants is they often have wonderful stories behind them that makes them, again, worth sharing. And we talk these days about biodiversity and how important it is for a good, healthy environment. For agriculture biodiversity, our heirloom plants are a great contributor to that, because they have a wide range of traits. They've been, over time, naturally selected. So they're strong, they're resistant, and they're resilient. And when we talk about gardening in extreme weather, these are characteristics that are important to us. But if you're talking about edible heirloom plants, flavor and quality is something that we all treasure when we're growing something to eat. Many gardeners, many farmers do favor specific heirloom plants because of their, think of the values they would have. Superior taste is one, texture, nutritional value. So they really do have a great deal of merit within a specific community. Now, how are they passed along? Well, heirloom plants typically maybe some that you would save the seeds from. They can be saved and replanted and have a consistent trait, a consistent appearance over time. And that is essential for maintaining and propagating these particular varieties. They're well adapted. In fact, in many cases, I'm also a grower of native plants and believe very strongly in the value of native plants. There is a handout through the Extension Service that I did not even cite, but it is native and adapted plants for Harris County. And when we talk about adaptation, that's because some of the plants that have been brought here have adapted so well that they are endemic in our environment. There we'll talk, for example, crepe myrtles. That's one that would be a good example. So something to think about. We also want to grow plants that are resilient because, let's face it, we have challenges. We have very hot, sometimes dry summers. We have snap freezes. Resilience is a great, great virtue. And there we go, climate change, weather extremes. Another thing that I think many of you gardeners can appreciate, we often have plants that we just love to grow over the years, but because of some of these changes, those plants may not be doing as well as as we're accustomed to. And it's a little sad. But by the same token, there's always something resilient to replace them. So it's when a good plant has to go, a plant that you love, there's always an opportunity to bring something of great value into your garden. Now we talk about the stories behind them, and I want to kind of illustrate the history of heirloom plants because we often think, well, this is a new plant. This Rose of Sharon or whatever, where did that come from? Well, Rose of Sharon or Althea actually came to Texas as early as 1830. And so this is an example of an early Texas gardener, Thomas Stewart McFarland. And you can all read some excerpts of his early gardening journal. It's called The Gardening Sentiments of an Early Texas Settler. So as you all know, Texas began to be settled in the early 19th century. We know Texas Independence Day in 1836 and what all goes with that. But settlers were arriving well before that. And this particular gentleman purchased land in East Texas, and he began recording how his garden was growing. He recorded what he brought in and how well it did. And it's a very, very interesting artifact because it shows you that he brought in plants that we grow today still. So this is just an example of it. My garden was finished today. This is my second garden. A good garden is full half support of a house or a family, and there is no pleasure so interesting as that to be found in the arrangement and beautifying of the different productions of nature in a well-arranged garden. And then you can see at the bottom, these are just some of the things that he sowed from seed, and they're very familiar to us all. You see there's edibles as well as ornamentals because not only was he concerned about supporting his family, but he wanted some things that were beautiful, such as Althea, sweet rose, running rose, that's an intriguing one, and many herbs as well. So it's a very, very interesting document if any of you are interested. Here's a little bit more comprehensive list of some of the things that he had available in his garden in 1840. So you can see there's privet, sour orange, quite interesting, varieties of roses, different strawberries. I see he tried to grow raspberries, and I would love to know how that went because that is a challenge generally. And then you can see as well some of the other herbs and edibles. And you see tobacco at the bottom. That's would have been certainly culturally appropriate at the time. And Irish potatoes, because of course. And a few more here. You can see eggplant, pennyroyal, interesting, squashes. So there's such a variety. You can see the way he's feeding his family has a great variety. These were mostly, again, brought by seeds and some by small plants. Again, there are a few things that we know now do not do that well here. Hollyhock at the bottom, it's really tough because it will get rust at some point. Catalpa, which is a lovely tree, and on. So this is just a good example. We talk about plants coming to Texas with the settlers, and that's an example of how many did. An example of something we all love is an heirloom tomato. When we think about tomatoes, we think either we grow some newer varieties in the backyard. Certainly we buy them at the store. Where did they come from? The likely origin was in the Andes. They've been cultivated, that cultivation, I should say, is traced back to pre-Columbian Mexico. Very, very long history of the tomato. So it's very likely that they arrived in North America in the early 1700s. And many immigrants over time brought seeds from their own country. And I have actually a quick story on that. This is a story from a fellow master gardener. She said, my grandmother came to the United States during World War II. She was a nurse, and she brought along her mother's seeds, mostly tomatoes. They were from Italy, I should have said. And they always called them Nani's tomatoes, but we think that they're probably gold medal crossed with a Brandywine heirloom, something like that. But seeds were some of people's most prized possessions and were taken with them as such during times of unrest or disasters. in a time when you couldn't just order seed packets. Sharing seeds was a vital source. And I couldn't agree more. We have so many great stories of that. And many of our best hybrids are crosses from these heirloom originals. And I put okra in here for the same reason, because okra is regarded as a diasporic cuisine. It was brought when there was, it was primarily brought to North America by enslaved people, which makes it a diasporic cuisine. As a people group is moved, they brought with them, thankfully, traditions that are staples now of Southern cooking. But it's a very, very old crop. It's a heat-loving member of the mallow family, prized for its edible seed pods. I love it still, and I will eat them raw off the plant. But okra originated in Western Africa, so it has a very, very early history, and it is a plant that has been treasured over time, over many, many, many centuries, and we still value it today. It has a very interesting history. So these are two examples of great edible heirlooms. But then thinking about what makes a pass-along plant, again, I said there's overlap, but there's not always overlap. They're usually acquired from someone else with a start, a slip, a cutting, a seed, or a bulb. So many, many different ways that you can acquire pass-along plants. They're known to be easy to propagate. They have historic roots, and many have ties to the immigrant's country of origin. So you can see how, again, they intersect with heirloom plants. Texas settlers brought some of our best loved plants to the state. Now, we also and John's story is a good example of the ivy. Many may have family significance, and sometimes it's just something that we accept, like, oh, that ivy came from my grandmother's plant, or my Christmas cactus came from, great Aunt Sue, or whatever. So things like that, they can evoke significance, friendships, memories, places, often represent generations. And the great thing about a pass-along plant is it does connect us to our roots in a very tangible way. When you see that plant, you remember where it came from, and that has a great deal of meaning. So other characteristics, they might have many multiple values, such as fragrance, beauty, history, and some of the heirloom plant traits. We say anyone can grow them. That may be a stretch because, but they tend to be the easiest of plants to care for and easy to pass along. They're durable, they're resilient, and they're hardy. And who would not want those characteristics in their backyard? So one thing I need to certainly mention is that pass along plants are those plants that are not patented, and it is prohibited by law from propagating. We are all prohibited by law from propagating patented plants. That legal license only goes with an authorized grower. So keep that in mind. If you cannot just go to the nursery, buy a patented rose and bring it home and start propagating it. It's against the law. And roses, for example, the labels, you would see something like PPAF, which is plant patent applied for, or a PP with a number, which is the plant patent already issued with the number such and such. So plant patents are valid for 20 years, which is only fair because somebody's put a lot of time, effort, energy, and resource into developing that new plant. But what do we do with the ones that we can pass along? We share them, we share the story behind them, and we make that connection with another person. And that's one of the great virtues of being able to pass along plants. One way to do it is, again, we've talked about many examples of seeds that were in transit around the world. You can propagate plants by seeds. You can give those seeds away. Generally, these open pollinated heirloom seeds are the way that we propagate plants from seeds. There are many good handouts on propagation from seed, and I think they'll be posted in the chat as well. We're not going to talk about the specific how-tos just as much as how they relate to passing plants along. But I would say always, when you have a packet of seeds and you get a commercial heirloom packet or something, or a friend gives you seeds, whatever instructions are involved, you'll have the best success by trying as closely as possible to follow the directions on the seed packet or from your friend. So here are just a few of those examples of resources for seed propagation. The one at the top is a very, very good PDF in detail, but I would encourage you, if you are interested in more, the Starting Plants from Seeds is a wonderful, detailed YouTube video by our former extension agent, Paul Winsky, and that is available on the Harris County Horticulture YouTube site. So, and there are others. And again, these will be posted in the chat. So a couple of plants to, you know what? I think I'm going to throw a spanner in the works here and stop here for questions before we talk about specific plants, if that's okay.
Well, look at you throwing a wrench in the gears of the program.
Yeah.
You know what? I'm glad you did, actually, and you must have known it because we have a couple of great questions here for you. Steve had a great question. This comes from the internet. He said, based on some of the descriptions of heirloom plants, it seems like they would almost fit into the category of native or Texas superstar plants. Would you agree or disagree with this assumption?
Well, I don't think it's an agree or disagree. I think it's true that many are. There's no question. Yeah, many are. Some of our Texas superstars certainly are. And that makes sense because of all the qualities that we talked about, that they're durable and they're resilient and they're tested over time. And they're, again, not the exclusive list of plants that would have those values, but it's like the Venn diagram. There's a lot of overlap with these things. I think the key takeaway is that they have become so well adapted that they're garden staples because we know they're tough plants, they're easy to grow, and these days people are pressed for time. It's difficult with our challenges that we face, so they're great choices for the garden.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other area, you know, when you were talking about taking seeds with you, which I never would have occurred to me, you know, and I love history, but I mean that, you know, I mean, it's the complete opposite of fast food. If I mean, you know, it's, you know, you gotta take your food and grow it wherever you're going to be. But in looking at it in terms of like, if you are a food connoisseur, I mean, if you, you know, are a foodie, and let's say you remember like I do, my grandma's, you were talking about okra. My grandma used to make the best fried okra, you know, that I ever had. Now, and they grew okra out there. She lived south of Dallas, and they grew okra out in their garden. And I imagine, you know, if we'd had the forethought, or they'd had to share those seeds, I know I could be eating the okra just, you know, if I cooked it the same way with tons of butter, you know, the real kind of butter, you know,
right.
And I'm sure lard or whatever. If we cooked it that way, we would actually have the same. We could be eating the same meal that our you know, our ancestors ate if we, you know, were, you know, saving those seeds and bringing them down. So what a neat concept.
Yeah, we do talk about connection, and that's exactly what it's about. It's evoking those memories, bringing family into the present, and yeah, I think it's a beautiful thing.
Awesome. Well, we've been putting the links in there, so I'll let you get back to it, and I'll keep making note of all the questions.
All right, and I probably won't have another spanner in the works for you. Okay, keep on track. A great example of a seed that is easy to share is a 4 o'clock plant. You don't see these grown as much anymore. You know, there are fashions in flowers, right? But my garden this year has been full of them. They originated in the Andes, hence the name Marvel of Peru. But they're an old historical garden plant. Thomas Jefferson grew them at Monticello, and they're so easily grown from seed because the seed makes you collect it. It's a rather probably tip of the little finger size seed, impossible to miss. And if you don't collect them, they'll be there next spring, no doubt about it. They come in many different colors. Pink is the most common, but they're white, red, yeah, on and on. They're beautiful and they're fragrant. One wonderful thing about 4 o'clocks that I think any of us try to garden for pollinators might want to understand is that they provide nectar source for evening pollinators. The moth is one of our most prolific pollinators, but they're more active at night, or dusk and evening. And so that's when the 4 o'clocks open up. they stay closed throughout the day. They open up in the evening. They let out that fragrance that just knocks your socks off. And that's when the moths are pollinating. So they're an important and very useful plant for the garden, and so easy to grow. Mine are about done, so you can count on them to be blooming steadily from May all the way through the summer, which is a virtue. But they're about done now. And I put zinnias on here and people go, oh, good grief, zinnias. Well, again, they're an old-fashioned favorite for a reason. They're easy to grow around here. They're heat tolerant. They're a reliable summer annual. They may reseed naturally. Most of mine do, but you can also collect the seeds to disperse them where you want them to be. But they're very easy to grow, and they originated in Mexico and Central America. So a wonderful pass-along plant. You can share. I have shared so many zinnia seeds with my friends. And again, they just scatter them and they grow and they're beautiful. And, what can beat that? Cosmos is another really reliable pass-along by seed plant. Cosmos sulphureus is the yellow, bright, vivid yellow that's native to Mexico, Central and South America. It was named by Spanish priests because of the order and the symmetry of the flower petals. So I love that. I think it's a beautiful thought. Easy to harvest seeds. When they dry, then they start to separate. And that's when you can harvest them, fill an envelope full, and pass them on. Fuss-free. I love that term. This is one that you don't see very often, not usually commercially available, but an easy plant to share. And it's called Jewels of Opar, Talinum paniculatum, originated in Central America. I have it in a few places in my backyard, and I love it for a shade filler. And it has this tiny little, these are actually from my backyard photos. So tiny little pink array that you can see, and it's very delicate, but it's great also as a filler if you're doing cut flowers. So it's really excellent to fill out the vase or the border and all containers. It does tolerate dry conditions. I have been told that it is edible. With anything that may be edible, please do your research, because I have not researched that, but someone says it is a great substitute for spinach. So again, that could be a virtue. Now, plants are also propagated by division, and that is so very different from what we've been talking about by growing plants from seeds. Vegetative propagation is a simple method where you take a large clump of plant, take the whole roots, dig it all out, and you can divide it either by using your hands, by using a tool. You just separate the plant into 2, into 4, depending on how large it is. A good time to do that is if it blooms in the spring, divide it in the fall. If it blooms in the fall, divide it in the spring. And summer bloomers, you can go either way with that. That's a general guideline, not absolutely necessary. But it's also important because if these are robust perennials, they will start to fade a little bit after 3 to 5 years. Division is essential to keeping them strong and healthy. So you can pot them up or plant them out in the garden. We have a little visual on what division looks like in a minute, but these are a couple of excellent resources on plant propagation by division. So again, these will be in the chat. This is the basic sequence. You have a whole plant, then you get your hands around the clump or the tools that you're going to use and just work something in, start to separate it, and then voila, you have 2 plants. So it usually works that way. Some can be a little persnickety, but in general, I've had great success dividing perennials over the years. I've had one that we'll talk about later that started as a single clump of phlox, and now I have it in probably 4 or 5 places. And every year it does better because it's getting divided at the right time. This is an old favorite. If you want to grow crinum, make sure you have plenty of room, but it's just a lovely, intriguing plant. It's native to warmer parts of Americas and of the Americas and Africa. Grows well through zones 11. And it's just tolerant of pretty much everything that you can throw at it. It can take sun, it can take shade, it can take clay, it can take sand. It very, very tough. There's a reason it's called a cemetery plant. And I always love what Felder Rushing says. He says that cemetery plants are plants that even dead people can grow. And Acrinum certainly kind of fits in that category. So you'll often see them in old Southern cemeteries and just blooming and growing and multiplying and basically carefree. And this is the hardy amaryllis. It's Hippeastrum johnsonii. And Johnsonii, there we go. My maiden name was Johnson, and I can't say it right. Anyway, so full sun to partial shade. This is a plant that I have. The original was given to me probably 32, 33 years ago, and I have since divided it in, given away many bulbs. It's just reliable. Every spring I have a pot full, as you can see. I have it dotted around places in the yard. I have it in other containers. And it's just kind of, it's one of those plants that is no trouble at all, kind of takes care of itself. You can grow it anywhere and it will give you that pop of red in the spring that you can absolutely count on. And this is the basic daylily. It's often called the ditch lily. Throughout Mississippi and Alabama, you can just see these sprouting up out of, in some random country road ditch. It's a native to China, but it is the single most popular shared plant in the world, cultivated at least 3,000 years. It's reliable, it's prolific. You can see that this is their native area. You can see them just growing on the hillside, which is lovely. Also, you can eat the pods, and the pods are delicious, just basically kind of dipped in a little batter and fried, and they're really, really wonderful. So it's a fascinating plant. And it's one of those I think we tend to look down on as we do, because there are countless thousands of beautiful improved hybrid varieties of the daylily. And I love, I have probably 4 or 5, love them all. But this is where they all came from. And I think it still deserves that kind of recognition because it is a really wonderful plant. Garden phlox, this is what I was talking about earlier when I said I had 1 and now I have probably 4 or 5. This is a basic phlox paniculata. John Fanick was discovered by Greg Grant in San Antonio, and I don't remember exactly where, but it is now a Texas superstar. So to the question earlier, yes, there are certainly many of these plants that have become Texas superstars for a very good reason. It can reach up to 3 feet tall. It has a very clumping growth habit. And again, the blooms are just winding down in my garden right now. So it has been blooming almost all summer long. Just the pollinators love it. It's a beautiful plant. Very, very tough plant. So tough and beautiful. Can't beat it. And the wood fern I have in here because it is, again, an underrated plant. But if you have a dry, shady area in your yard, it's very difficult to get things to grow. I've had some success with various native plants, and I've had some success with wood fern, which actually is a native. And it's a herbaceous perennial, can reach 2 to 3 feet tall. It will cover that area, doesn't care about the soil. It will die back in the winter, though. But it's a great ground cover for shady areas. And then we think a lot about sharing plants and passing them along. We talked about doing that with seeds. We've talked about division, and cuttings is probably the way that comes to mind, I think, for most people. There are many different types of cuttings, softwood stem, semi-hardwood, and hardwood. They all require a slightly different approach. Also air layering and other soil layering, very different ways, but still ways that you can propagate plants. And these resources, again, will be in the chat. I would also encourage you, Paul Winsky's video on starting plants from cuttings on the horticulture YouTube site is very, very helpful. So highly recommend. Now, I'm not going to go into the history of the Peggy Martin rose because I think it's been talked about over and over and over. But I will tell you, it is a wonderful, reliable garden rose for very good reason. It's a vigorous climber. It's a prolific spring bloomer, but it will still bloom sporadically throughout the year. And a great thing with a climber is it's nearly thornless. So that's who can't, that's a wonderful thing when you're the one doing the pruning, which is really important. You're not going to have all of those little prickles getting you. And it's very easily propagated by cuttings, softwood or semi-hardwood. Had great luck to the extent that I can often take a Peggy Martin cutting and without a lot of extensive preparation, I can cut it at the node and literally put it in dirt. And yes, dirt. I meant really a corner of the yard dirt, not fancy potting soil, which I love. And it will grow. So wonderful plant. And this is true of Mutabilis, which is a great old China rose, a single petal China rose. It's often called the butterfly rose for a good reason. And you can see why. The blooms open and then they change colors. And so it does look like a bush full of butterflies. It's beautiful. It tolerates shade well. It's got an open flower, so it's easy for the pollinators to feed upon. And it's easily propagated by cuttings. I say the same thing with Mutabilis. I have cut pieces and just put them somewhere because I didn't have a place prepared, and they have grown. And so I think it's just a wonderful rose to share with friends. It's a very old rose. It's fine to share, and it's easy to share. And so plumeria, this is a quite different leap, right? From talking about roses to talking about plumeria. But the reason that we've included plumeria is, number one, people around Houston love to grow it, right? And people around Houston love to share it. Anyone that grows plumeria wants to be able to give this gift to someone else because it's beautiful. It's got a gorgeous bloom. It's got a tremendous fragrance. It's easy to grow in our area. The only caveat to that is that these can get quite large, but I think we've all seen and known people that had, literally dozens of plumeria because they're just that wonderful to grow. But they require winter protection. So I call it the potted plant shuffle. You can bring the plants into the garage or a heated garage in the winter, and then they go back out in the spring. Sometimes they're just removed from the pots, which is what I do, and wrapped in burlap. But either way, know that you can easily propagate plumeria from a stem cutting, just a branch that breaks off, that sort of thing. And it's one of the most popular pass along plants that we have around here. Verbena, this is a particular variety that's called pass along pink. Again, for good reason. I had one plant that I bought 5 years ago, and now it's probably in 6 pots at least. It grows very easily from layering or stem cutting, sun to partial shade, and moist soil. In the summer, it does not like to dry out, but it, other than that, requires very little care or effort. And so Queen of the Night I have on here because when we think about the South and gardens and growing, this plant is actually associated with what they used to call bloom parties. And so Eudora Welty, the writer, often had bloom parties at her house, and everybody would gather around, have cocktails, no doubt, and sit around later at night and wait for the plant to open. So it is known as night blooming cereus, night blooming cactus, orchid cactus, many, many more names. It's a native to rainforests. It has kind of an epiphytic growth habit, but it will adapt to a container because most people do grow it in containers at this point. But it only blooms at night. It has a very large, fragrant flower. A lot of times you can see all over Facebook where people are posting the photos of their particular Queen of the Night that bloomed with, 10 or 12 blooms, and they're very excited about it. Very easy to propagate through. They're not actually stem cuttings. It's called a cladode, and that piece of the plant can be allowed to dry a little bit and then placed in soil, and then it grows. Very easy to propagate. Confederate rose is a beautiful southern heirloom, Hibiscus mutabilis. It blooms summer through fall. It can get extremely large. It can be like a tall trunk shrub or a small tree, and it will die back in a cold winter, but it will also pop right back out in the spring. So you can grow it in a container, but you have to prune carefully to keep it a reasonable height. But when you see a Confederate rose in full bloom, Again, it's not a true rose. It's a form of hibiscus, but it is a stunning plant. So Angel's trumpet is another one that is beautiful, absolutely stunning when you see one in full bloom. It's a native to the Andes, prefers our warm, humid days and cooler nights. In the summer, we can't do much about cooler nights, but we can sure provide warm, humid days. And it is a very long perennial evergreen shrub. Just be aware, and I think this has been talked about a lot, be aware that it does contain poisonous tropane alkaloids. So that can result in anticholinergic poisoning. All parts can be poisonous if ingested. So if you choose to grow Angel's trumpet, please grow it in an area that is not going to be exposed to children, pets, and be careful even handling it at some point. But it is a beautiful plant, very popular, and many, many colors too. I'll say that. The yellow I haven't seen as much as the white, but it is a beautiful plant. Mock orange is a stunner in full bloom in the spring. It's just sometimes solid white. There are many, many varieties. There's a native Philadelphus texensis, but most of the varieties we see in gardens did originate in Asia. Full sun to partial shade, many types of soil, just grows and blooms and is beautiful. And again, we talked a little bit about Althea, Rose of Sharon. It can be just a beautiful garden shrub, sometimes very large. I have one, or a piece of one, that had been grown at my dad's house for about 45 years. So that's going to be a treasure. My niece is growing it right now and it's doing well. So we're going to be propagating that one. It's not picky about soil, variety of colors and cultivars, but it has very few pests and diseases, although downy mildew and a few other things can be an issue, but in general, it's very robust. It's also a great pollinator plant for our pollinators and even our hummers, who are also pollinators. And I have crepe myrtle on here. People are like, why crepe myrtle? Well, because it has a very interesting history. So it was recorded in the Tang Dynasty as early as the 7th century. When you see that crepe myrtle growing around your neighborhood or in your front yard, you're thinking, oh, crepe myrtle, everybody's got one. But they have a very, very long, extensive history and were probably brought to South Carolina by the French botanist André Michaux in the late 18th century. Crepe myrtle was grown at Mount Vernon, which is very cool. And it's been widely adapted throughout the southern states. We have some great resources on crepe myrtles. I see it's been posted in the chat already. There's an article, Crepe Myrtles by Height, which is authored by Skip Richter, our former extension agent. He's now the host of Garden Line. That's a wonderful resource if you want to learn about which crepe myrtle to plant in your yard. And it can be propagated if it's a non-patented variety, an older variety. Can be propagated by semi-hardwood cuttings. And as you all know, propagated by seeds. You probably have a few that pop up in your yard now and then. But in general, it's hardy and vigorous. There are some newer issues with crepe myrtles. Well, aphids is an old issue, but we have a little pest called the crepe myrtle bark scale, which is a scale insect that is causing problems. We're seeing more and more questions about that through the Master Gardener hotline. But there are also ways to treat that. So something to be aware of, but crepe myrtles are Southern classic. And figs we have on here because they're so easy to share. We think of figs as a fruit of the South, although they are grown all over the world. They originated or were known as one of the first cultivated fruits over 4,000 years ago in Egypt and Saudi Arabia. And they were used as a trade vehicle. So that's one thing I think that is important to understand, is that many of these plants were they were not currency because, but back then there was an active barter system. Figs were valuable. And so they were often traded, introduced probably by the Spaniards to North America in the early 16th century. Very easy to root with stem cuttings. We have a little story from one of our master gardeners who mentioned that when her father retired, he took up fig propagation as a hobby. And the family had never even known that he was interested in any type of gardening, but he took up fig propagation. And since then, and he started requesting cuttings from people in a Facebook group. And that's how he got his plant material to get started. But at this point, he's probably propagated close to 80 trees, gives them away to family and friends. And when they grow that fig tree, they think of their grandfather, or they think of that gentleman. And I think that's just, again, a lovely story of how plants can make that connection with other people. So we've talked a lot about specific plants, what to share, how they're shared. But I think we also want to talk about, how do you make those connections to find people that have plants, right? I mean, how does that happen? My little phone fell off the standby rack. So you can share them with friends and neighbors. Garden clubs are a great sharing vehicle. There are many Facebook groups that you can find online that literally will say it's a plant swap group. So those are also out there. Neighborhood message boards, lots of different ways to kind of make that connection with others. There are some kind of ground rules that you might want to think about if you are interested in either obtaining a plant this way or sharing one. But if you want to bring something into your yard, do some research and make sure that the plant is something you really want, that is not invasive. An aggressive growth habit can be dealt with. An invasive plant is not something you want to add to your yard. So, is it a messy plant? Does it drop things everywhere? That sort of thing. Now, if you're invited to come over to someone's yard and dig up a plant or take some cuttings, take all your own supplies. That's just the polite thing to do. You're the one that's getting the gift of the plant. So take everything you need to do that. If you're digging up, try not to just leave a big gaping hole in the person's yard. Try to leave as much soil behind as you can. And you also want to take a good look at whatever you're digging up. Make sure you're not bringing some unwanted little critters home with you, any pests or insects or things like that. And clean up behind yourself. That, again, is just good plant manners. So whatever you have to offer in exchange is a nice thing to do. And I did say, and this is true of any plant you bring into your yard, check it over very carefully. Make sure there's no pests, no disease issues. Kind of prune it and tidy it up. It's helpful to water things. If you're taking cuttings, take a mister with you and a Ziploc bag so that you can put cuttings in the bag, mist them to keep them wet until you can get them home and pot them up. So water anything if possible before you transport it. That's just, again, it's going to help the plant resist any shock that might incur. And label. It's always a good idea to label what you have obtained. Make sure that you know how to grow it on. And just, again, take your own stuff to keep your car from getting dirty. So all the rules are different. When you go to a real plant swap, one plant swap may have different rules from another. So just make sure you have read the rules, that you know what's expected of you. Attend one, observe the first time. But plant swaps are a lot of fun. They connect people. You can really in person share that story behind the plant and pass it on to someone who's going to appreciate it. And as gardeners, we just love to do that. We often share plants at our monthly meetings and enjoy what we can, add to our yard because it came from another master gardener. And I would say that the bulk of the material for this presentation is based on 3 references, but I will include the one at the top because it's fascinating. It's an 1863 edition of The Field and Garden Vegetables of America, and it is available online for free. So that is why I included it, because it's just interesting reading. If you would like to read more about plants coming to America and how they were utilized in the culture, it's a great resource for that, and free. And then I have a few books that I relied on as well. Felder Rushing's Pass Along Plants, co-authored with Steve Bender. Wonderful book. Just so much value in talking about how we pass along plants and stories and make connections with people. And then another classic is Heirloom Gardening with Bill Welch and Greg Grant. So this is a real Southern gardening staple, and it's heavy. You can work out with this book. And then lastly, a Houston classic is the River Oaks Garden Club. This is an older one, minus the 4th edition, but you can never go wrong. If you see the River Oaks Garden Club book in a secondhand bookstore or thrift store, it's great to snap up a copy because there's a lot of wonderful information in here. Maybe older information, but it still truly has value for Houston gardens. And I think we are at the end. We certainly appreciate the opportunity to talk about this, and whatever questions we have, we'll take them.
Yeah, we do. We definitely have a few questions. Real quick, I want to point out we have a survey that has been, I've posted in the link in the chat a few times. I'm going to post one more time, and there, please take a moment and fill out that survey. Let us know what you think. Let's get into some of these questions. First off, so crepe myrtle. All right, I have kind of a love-hate relationship with crepe myrtles, which I think I'm not alone from what I understand. Is it, first of all, would you consider it an invasive plant, an invasive tree?
No.
I mean, other than the fact that everybody
aggressive, perhaps.
Okay.
At times, yeah. Are you talking about the stuff that it drops and it creates seedlings, or are you talking about the fact that it's hard to get rid of if you want to?
More so that it's hard to get rid of. I mean, I've seen more than once where you've like people like, oh, they cut down that crepe myrtle, and next week it's like, well, where'd that bush come from? Where is that?
Yeah, they'll come back from the roots. We have one that we took out, 5 years ago. Every now and then it still will sprout from a piece of root that we didn't get. It's that tough, but it's not considered invasive. But it certainly can be aggressive. A lot of seedlings in my yard that I have to constantly take out. The biggest issue right now with crepe myrtles is this crepe myrtle bark scale insect, which is just popping up all over the place and causing a lot of grief because it's a really tough insect. Usually it's done a lot of damage by the time people discover it.
I was going to say, if it can take on a crepe myrtle, it is a very tough insect because, and that's good to know because I had not heard about those. Question from the internet: is the Confederate rose the same as the Rose of Sharon?
No, it's not. They are both members of the hibiscus family. I may be saying that wrong, but they are very different plants. A Confederate rose has a different growth habit altogether. Very long, very tall, arcing branches. Rose of Sharon has a little bit stubbier, still vertical growth, but a stubbier type of branch and a different shaped flower altogether. It's got that open kind of single petal look to it. Confederate rose is multiple petals and really beautiful. I mean, it does look like a rose in the flower, but not in the plant.
Okay, not much. Good to know. You had talked about ditch lilies or day lilies, and how you could. I didn't know you could eat the pods. I had no idea that was. I kind of want to try that now. But you were talking about how it's the most hybridized version of the plant, and how there's so many different genetic species of it. How can you get an original version? If you are, when I say original, I mean, how can you get some that are because I don't think you're going to find them at, certainly not the big box store. Do you have any suggestions on where to find maybe some?
Yeah, I mean, that's the classic pass along scenario, because you're right. You're not going to find them in the nurseries, or rarely. It seems like I probably have seen some at some point, but they're not going to be one of those commercial crops for sure. So the best way is to find someone that has it already and get them to divide theirs for you. You can also grow daylilies from seeds, but it's much faster to just divide an existing one.
Got it.
I wouldn't advise you to dig it out of someone's ditch without permission.
That was my next question. How many doors have you knocked on with a shovel saying, "Can I go dig up one of those?"
Well, but see, that's really an important point, because there are plant hunters all over the world, all over the country, and all over the state who have been doing that for a very long time. Greg Grant in his book talks about, and those that follow Greg Grant know, I mean, he has discovered so many plants that way by
Mhm.
finding them just growing out in the middle of nowhere where it was okay to take it, or finding it in someone's property and having to request permission to take it and propagate it. So it's still happening today. There's still many, many plants that are out there that just haven't been recognized yet as some of our heirlooms.
A great way to meet your neighbors. Just leave the shovel in your car when
Yeah,
you knock on the door. Don't
exactly right.
you mentioned bloom parties, which I had never heard of. I love that. Eudora Welty and mentioning a bloom party. I think that should something that should come back. If it's not there, maybe join those with exchange plants, maybe a bloom party in exchange.
I think it's much more exciting than just a live stream.
There you go. It's
So,
rooting it on.
yeah.
Uh, and one other thing you're talking about, okay, so Christmas is coming up, and I say it because it's that far away. But if you're thinking in terms of if you want to get into pass along plants, or the holiday season is coming up, and you're thinking, what would be a great way to, kind of start something where you're passing along these. What would you recommend as far as like maybe something that's already in your yard, or
Mhm.
something that you can maybe go find a good version of and get a lot of something that in a size or a format that you can gift to your friends and family.
Yeah, I mean, for a house plant, one of the classics is the ivy that you have.
Mhm.
That's certainly
Right.
a great gift. But for holiday time, a Christmas cactus is a great choice because they're
Okay.
very easy to propagate. Probably not a lot of time to propagate them between now and Christmas, but it's something that's a very good choice because if any of you have people may not understand that a Christmas cactus can live for a century, the actual plant. So,
Wow.
yeah, it's an amazing thing, and they're beautiful when they bloom at Christmas. So, and easy to propagate just by taking a little bit of plant material and starting a new one. So that's a great gift for Christmas. And amaryllis bulbs are popular too.
Okay. Well, now that I think about it, I might have to pull the ivy out and see if I can, pass that along to some friends and family. So, Valerie, I saw in the comment section real quick. I want to point out we have Harris County Master Gardeners plant sales on Saturday, September 28th, coming up at Alabonson Park. And then, real quick, Julia wants to know if Christmas cactus is an actual cactus.
No, it's really not. It's much more of a succulent, has more of a succulent growth habit.
Okay, all right. And one other it says, Steve commented, says, I've used the Bio Advanced Insect Disease and Mite Control for the black crepe myrtle problem. That might be a one solution. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, and so that's if I may be wrong, but I believe that's a systemic approach, and so that's certainly the last resort if you've got a really bad case of bark scale. We kind of recommend something we call IPM, which is integrated pest management, the least harmful intervention first. And
Right.
so you kind of walk through some of the things, but if you can't get rid of it, then going to a systemic may ultimately be the only way to save that plant. But a lot of times it can be removed with cultural controls and then, escalating up through the spectrum there.
Well, Valerie, thank you so much for your time. As always, I want to remind everybody our next show and last show of 2024 will be on October 15th, and it will be gardening for extreme weather. I saw a tentative schedule for next year, 2025, and I can tell you it looks really, really interesting. So and then also I think we're going to have some new, some updates and some exciting things happening. So you definitely want to mark your calendars now for coming up October 15th, but also next year when we come back to the show. Valerie, thank you so much for your time. I hope to see you next year presenting as well. Are you on one of these?
Powerful perennials.
That was one I really wanted to know about. So good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. And we will see everybody next time. Thanks for watching.
Thanks, everyone.